Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And this is the second part to the series that I wanted to make leading up to the Investors Conference, Investor Analyst Conference later in the week. We have it starting on the 10th, March 10th. It'll be Verizon. The 11th is T-Mobile, and the 12th is AT&T. I've already made the video of T-Mobile's. If you haven't seen it, I will leave that in the description down below. So what do I anticipate and expect from Verizon on their Analyst Day, which is on, as you see here, on the 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern? I expect it to be very brief. The reason I say that is because it's so late in the afternoon. Could I be wrong? Sure, but I haven't seen a time or anything to as long as the event is going to be. T-Mobile's conference is scheduled to be 3 hours. That's very long. Is Verizon's necessarily going to be that long, that late in the evening? Likely not. Could I be wrong? Sure. But I think it's going to be very brief based on the fact that Verizon is going to get straight to the point in their conference. So there's likely not many questions in the follow-ups to be asked. A lot of people are anticipating lots of questions about C-band. We know that. They handled millimeter wave last year at the Analyst Day, where they said they're going to increase the infrastructure density by 5 times on millimeter wave. So they kind of let you know, okay, this is the infrastructure. This is where we're going to deploy it. This is how densely we're going to deploy it. And this is what we're spending on it. So that one was very brief too. So not much to say from that. And I expect it to go as brief as that one did last year on Wednesday. Will there be some other questions? Sure. If Verizon is not very detailed in their presentation, I'm sure during the Q&A, some analysts are going to have additional questions. And I'm expecting to have very detailed responses from all carriers across the board, as I mentioned in the T-Mobile video. Again, if analysts ask right questions, there's going to be information overload. There's going to be a lot of info to unpack during these conferences. Again, this is the first time that all carriers can speak after purchasing C-band. And it just so happens that Verizon and AT&T just bought their prime real estate of spectrum in that C-band auction for 5G. So there'll be continuous questions that'll come from this. They're going to start asking questions. How quickly can Verizon scale this? Can they monetize it adequately? If monetization is in play, how does that look like for the future? In terms of the investors are always going to look at, how do I make money from this investment on the spectrum? Now, the only difference with this is when AT&T made their purchases, and I'll talk about that in their video as well when I make part 3. AT&T made their purchases to gain additional revenue streams. In when they bought Time Warner, they bought DirecTV, which DirecTV, we all know that mess kind of backfired, but they purchased that to essentially gain more revenue and become a bigger player in the market. Verizon just spent $50 billion almost on the lifeline. Spectrum is the lifeline of their business. They needed this. They really needed this. So there was really nothing or any pushback from investors that could have told Verizon otherwise in terms of spending that much money on the C-band. Yes, there are several options to monetize this. Home internet over the wireless airwaves is going to be a big one. But again, as I mentioned in previous videos, I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but just putting it into perspective. It's a competitive market. It's not like, as I mentioned, it's not like just because Verizon says, oh, hey, we now offer home internet, that all people are going to flock to their home internet. There's still going to be competition for it. They're going to have to fight for some of those customers. They're going to have to competitively compete. Will they need a market correction? I think so. If the FCC and the FTC are going to allow advertising on completely uncapped plans, unlimited data, uncapped. I think eventually Verizon is going to have to position themselves in that same manner. The Magenta Max, I know it's not big yet, but I feel like it's going to start picking up steam. They're advertising, marketing it very heavily. I'm seeing it on ESPN. I'm seeing it on other channels. So they're investing heavy on this. Just to give you guys some numbers, I can't give you guys specific numbers because I received it from an internal source from a database. But in the month of February, T-Mobile outspend in marketing. They outspend both AT&T and Verizon combined by 7 million. So they spent 7 million more than AT&T and Verizon combined. So let that sink in. As we have discussed previously, T-Mobile is a marketing machine. So they're going to market their product, and they do it very effectively. It makes you, when you see that commercial or that ad or that marketing, it makes you want to be with them. So they do that very well, and that's something that the big two in AT&T and Verizon are going to have to adjust, and they're going to have to compete differently. Try something different. The value play that Verizon presented with the streaming options, it seems to be working potentially on retention, but it's not necessarily working for them to bring in more growth. They're obviously slowing down on growth. I know last quarter was a decent quarter, but they are, and even they said it, that they are anticipating to not grow as much anymore. They're still going to create volume, they said, but they're not chasing unprofitability, as they call it. So that is something Verizon is going to have to work through. They're going to have to deal with the bumps in the road, and they're going to have to adjust. It's a very competitive market now. T-Mobile, it favors T-Mobile. Many say that, oh, what if this happened? What if? No, it favors T-Mobile. I'm just being objective. I'm not favoring one side. This market condition, as it's structured now, it favors T-Mobile. And that should be eye-opening to the AT&Ts and Verizons. T-Mobile mentioned it on their last call. Their margins favor them. Will Verizon's margins be able to remain where they're at? Likely not. They will have to make a market correction. So that is something that will be discussed during their Analyst Day. It will 100% be, how do we monetize C-band? How quickly can you scale it? Will they ask how much more densification is needed to sufficiently make C-band work? In some markets, they have it. Don't get me wrong. The New York Cities, the Chicagos, most of the major markets that they have the C-band in starting at the end of this year, they'll be fine. 100%. Don't get me wrong. They will be 100% fine with what they got. It covers about 60% of the population. But beyond that, it can get tricky. In the state of Texas, they purchased a lot of that deeper spectrum holdings in the C-band, the 160 megahertz and above. In Texas, they really don't compete that well. They don't have the market share to really back it up. And in some of these markets, I'm being told they don't have the densification like they do in potentially on the East Coast and the New York and the New Jerseys. So that's additional cost involved in that. How do they fund the additional densification that's needed? So there'll be a lot to unpack from that one. I do expect it to be very brief, but I also expect it to be very detailed on the information that we receive from this. They will have to be. One thing that I want to mention that's in Verizon's favor, they went through this already in terms of the debt load. They have a proven history of making it work. When they did the buyout of Vodafone, that was $130 billion in debt that they took on their balance sheet, and they took care of it. So they have a proven track record, so more of the investors are going to have confidence in the plan. They're a well-run company. That's one thing that AT&T lacks. They really don't have a proven track record of handling that much debt. So more investors are going to be skeptic about them because it's a lot of debt. Even after this, I predict once the numbers are fully ran and everything is looked at and all the math is done, I still predict AT&T to have more debt than Verizon. But in return, I think they have a short-term, midterm, much quicker access to gaining revenue and profits to offset that, to remain with a strong positive cash flow to pay down on that debt. Verizon's is more mid to longer term. They got to get the spectrum cleared in C-band. They got to scale it, which they're going to do, but that's going to require a good chunk of money, trust me. There's equipment costs, there's radio costs, there's tower techs. I mean, all that has a cost associated with it. And I predict that's another question that will be asked. Does their capex increase next year? It likely will, 20%. Again, that's just a speculation at this point of mine, but I think it needs to happen because they're going to have their hands full. They're still going to want to scale millimeter wave. They want to incorporate CBRS, C-band, all the radios, and I know it's cheaper. I know if you bundle and buy in bulk, it's cheaper. But again, just keep in mind, it adds up. It's not cheap. Verizon touches way more sites than any carrier in the United States. They have densification almost in a lot of the bigger markets better than anyone. I know their macro totals don't really show it, but it was brought to my attention not too long ago that you really can't go by their macro totals because they have other third-party companies that operate some of the towers that they have on a nationwide basis. So there's going to be several things to decipher on their analyst day. T-Mobile's is going to be long. It's going to be 3 hours. I doubt Verizon's will be, but we'll still get a lot of good info and detailed. And we will see. Maybe they get asked, do they respond to T-Mobile's Magenta Max? I mean, anything is on the table during this analyst day. Anything. They could be asked uncomfortable questions. Some of those questions they may not be able to answer. I mean, I know we're supposed to get very detailed answers, but some of these questions they may not be able to answer right now. Like, does your capex go up next year? That's going to be a tough one. We usually don't get that guidance until Q4 of this year. They could make a prediction, but they still have to see how this year is going to go and what they're projected to do for this year and meet those goals first before they even think about next year. So they have a lot to work through. It's going to be a really competitive environment with T-Mobile stepping up again, being very aggressive. T-Mobile knows they have a head start. Yes, Verizon does clear some of that spectrum at the end of this year. Yes, they did purchase the entire 100 megahertz of the A block, and AT&T does get 40 of that for now. But there's still other markets that fall outside of that top 50, like El Paso and I think Albuquerque and some other ones, where they don't get access to that C-band until the end of 2023, December. So those are markets right now that T-Mobile is looking to clearly scale N41 and penetrate those markets heavily to gain more market share, because right now there's nothing AT&T and Verizon can do in those markets to combat what T-Mobile's coming with. Yeah, Verizon has CBRS, but I could tell you from firsthand experience, they haven't deployed that here. And if it is deployed, it's not at scale because I'm not seeing it. Albuquerque, I'm not too sure, but I'm sure there's other markets where they're still waiting to deploy that CBRS for whatever reason. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they combat T-Mobile in the markets where C-band doesn't clear until the end of 23, because T-Mobile has that 2.5 ready now. They're scaling it very quickly. So it's going to be on a lot of sites with a lot of capacity, and as most of you are aware, they're monetizing early with home internet. It's in the beta pilot stage. The T-Vision, I still think it's in a beta pilot stage as well. It's not primetime ready, but that's a story for another video. So again, Verizon is going to have to bring They're going to have to bring the whole blueprint, the layout. They're going to have to lay it out for the investors, the analysts. There's going to be a lot of skepticism. There's going to be a lot of, hey, are you going to stop? That's another question. Are they going to slow down or come to a complete stop on millimeter wave because of C-band? So those are some of the questions that I hope analysts ask on that day, because that's going to be very informational, like very, very informational. And then, like I said, they may not be able to answer that question, or they could say, yeah, it's going to slow down, or yeah, we're going to completely stop millimeter wave for now and get the C-band rolling because we need it. Because right now, if we're looking at capacity and coverage, T-Mobile wins that hands down. They win it hands down. In terms of a tower macro giving you more capacity at range with the 2.5. Verizon only does it right now with millimeter wave. I know I've seen some CBRS tests recently that could do 700-800, but I'm sure that'll take Verizon a while to scale that as well. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, I think it's going to be very brief for Verizon. They'll get straight to the point. They'll let the analysts and investors know during the presentation, this is how we're going to attack it. And I'm sure Verizon and most of the executives know what questions are likely to be asked at these conferences. So again, let me know what you think about that in the comment section down below. Look forward to reading the comments. If you have been on the channel or you're new to the channel and you have not yet liked, shared, subscribed, make sure you do so. Hit the notification bell so you are notified when I do upload content. Make sure to follow the social media outlets for more updates and interactions. Thanks again for watching. This is Tyrone with Tech Life, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.